Hello and welcome to the Geek Battle Gaming YouTube channel. In today's discussion we are going to be taking a look at this, the Evercade, not the fancy Evercade EXP, no, we are going back to the OG, the original gangster, the original Evercade model. We're going to find out if this is still awesome in 2024, so without further ado, let's get into it. Bosh! For a system that launched in 2020, it feels weird to be revisiting it as an outdated piece of hardware just 4 years later. The Evercade has been an awesome experience for me, and as a console, or should I say a series of consoles that I have really got into over the last few years. In today's discussion, I'm going to revisit the original OG handheld and do an updated review after having owned it for a few years. Well, actually, this isn't strictly an updated review, as I never originally reviewed the original model of the Evercade, but have reviewed both the Evercade VS home console and the Evercade EXP, which was the upgraded successor to the console I'll be focusing on today. So in a sense, it will be weird to do a new system review where in most ways I imagine the console will be something of a downgrade compared to the EXP, which I reviewed just last year. But this is where I will evaluate if the OG original Evercade is still worth seeking out in 2024, and if it has any advantages over the newer handheld and its home console brothers. I'll start with the design of the console. It has a nice form factor, and like the Nintendo Switch, the PSP, Atari Lynx, Game Gear and Game Boy Advance and others, it is a horizontally orientated device. The D-pad reminds me of a Sega one, like what you'd have on the Mega Drive or the Sega Saturn, both of which were excellent for 2D games. There is also the diamond layout of A, B, X, Y buttons, but that doesn't follow the Sega route of a 6-button layout, but it is in line with the diamond layout of buttons found on Nintendo, PlayStation and Xbox consoles. Interestingly, the buttons are labelled the same as found on the Xbox, rather than found on, say, the Nintendo Switch or Super Nintendo with the swapped X and Y buttons. Considering the Evercade isn't capable of emulating Xbox games and could do Super Nintendo and PlayStation 1 games, I'm surprised they didn't follow the Nintendo layout or use PlayStation style symbols. Actually, I imagine Sony probably have got copyrighted that if you use the triangle, circle, square and cross, so probably they couldn't do that, and as the Evercade gets mostly NES and Mega Drive ports, using letters at least makes a bit more sense here. The shoulder buttons on the console are my least favourite part of it, as they have a weird dip in them and it doesn't feel good to press your finger onto this ridge. Obviously, we're talking about the OG Evercade here, and I must note that the EXP did add L2 and R2 shoulder buttons, which give greater compatibility with PS1 games and more options for home computer games that may require more input buttons. So the lack of these buttons is definitely something that will be an occasional issue if you're deciding between this and the EXP. It's also worth noting that the Super Pockets, the HyperMega Tech Super Pockets, which are basically Evercades in all but name and can play the same cartridges, do feature 4 shoulder buttons, but their layout and positioning has been one of the most divisive aspects of the console. Compared to the EXP, I do prefer the OG Evercade's positioning of its menu and start and select buttons. These are vertically stacked on the EXP and easy to muddle up as a result. On the OG system, if you want to hit the menu and do a quick save, it's just under the D-pad, and there's no chance of a mispress if you intended to hit one of the other menu buttons. Likewise, I prefer the feel of the volume buttons on the original console compared to the EXP, where they have sharp edges to touch. Now, This isn't going to be a point where I think people will be like, well, damn it, I'm not getting the EXP, I'm going to stick with the OG because of the volume buttons. But hey, you know, one way or another, it is worth noting. As an older device, it charges with a micro HDMI cable, and this is still fairly common to get, but getting less so, as it has been all but replaced by USB Type-C solutions on most devices nowadays. The display on the original is quite low resolution compared to what you can get on other devices and even on the EXP. And coming back to it after having used the EXP over the last year, it is noticeably worse. This said, I never complained about its display before the EXP arrived. With a 480 by 272 display, it is fairly poor compared to the EXP's 800 by 480 display, but with mostly NES, Mega Drive and retro arcade games on the system, I was okay with the display on the original model. The viewing angles are worse on the original system, but again, does that matter unless you're planning to show someone the console over your shoulder? Coming onto the library of games, which is available for the Evercade, and it's truly an impressive lineup. The Evercade is a unique proposition in the video game space, as unlike anything else out there, the games released for it are almost always released in collections. Generally speaking, these are between 7 to 15 games per cartridge and are usually collections based on individual publishers or developers. We have just had Full Void, which I reviewed on the channel, check it out if you haven't done so already, which was the first single game per cartridge release on the system, and there have been a few more that have been like 3 games at a time or dual game cartridges. But still, generally speaking, you're looking at about 7, 10, 15 games per cartridge. When the Evercade first launched, you could get a console that came with various numbers of cartridge collections, and after monitoring the situation for a little while, I didn't want to be the first to dive in case it was a flop or a bomb, I decided to dive in with both feet and ordered the bundle that came with the first 10 cartridge collections. This instantly gave me, I don't know, maybe 100 games that I could play on the system, some from Atari, some from Interplay, some from Namco, and so on and so forth. And whilst it is any retro gamer's dream, it's also a bit of a nightmare for someone like me who has a huge backlog of games to get through already. The decision to have cartridge collections inevitably means you'll get some games you don't care for or wouldn't have chosen to buy if it was an individual release. But this model of releasing games this way also means you are more likely to play some games that otherwise you wouldn't have bothered to get. It's a great way to discover some hidden gems. Blaze, who make the Evercade, were also very smart to incentivize players into buying more than they may have otherwise, by leaning into people's love of collecting. The cartridges are numbered and they have a habit of releasing new hardware, and there are players who like to buy all of what is made available. I've got a bunch of reviews of cartridges on the channel, once again check them out, so won't get into all of the games that have been released so far on the Evercade, but we'll just give a general view of where things are at the start of 2024. There have been around 50 different cartridges released, and each year there are about 12 new cartridges added to the library. They cost around £15 to £17 each year, and are generally speaking a well-curated collection of games. One thing that has been an annoyance is that some of the games have fallen into being legacy cartridges and are no longer going to be produced. Now, one of the biggest selling points of the Evercade is that players can get physical carts, and it's a way to get old titles in the modern era in an official way to support the developers. Well, this idea only works if the carts are continually available, and a surprising amount of carts have already become legacy, and this in turn has caused the resale value of those games in question to balloon to insane rates at times. Still, if it's any other console, then there'll be games that no longer get printed and you won't be able to get them, so it's kind of the same in that sense, but just with the focus being on getting retro stuff. It is a shame that some games have become legacy in 3 years or less. To stick with a slight negative point whilst we're in that mood, it has also become a thing to have to update the newer Evercade consoles multiple times a year, and recently it has been also introduced to update the cartridges. I thought the whole point of Evercade was to have physical carts and that classic experience, but it was never the case with my Super Nintendo that I would find that my SNES carts are bricked because of a dodgy update issue. Still, I think generally speaking this isn't a major widespread issue, but if you go on the Facebook groups or Twitter about Evercade, you'll see it there because all of the people with the problems are going to congregate there, and that makes sense. Now, I'll speak more about the games later on. For now though, let's focus on some other aspects of the OG console. Unlike the EXP and the Evercade VS, you can't connect the original console to the internet. It's also the case that unless there is some major issue that they need to resolve later down the line, Blaze have said that there aren't going to be any further updates to the system. I only updated my OG Evercade once, and whilst I'm sure this wasn't the experience that most people have, using the tool to do so almost bricked my PC. And I'm not kidding, I only did this once I got the Duke Nukem cartridges a few weeks ago, and when I used the update tool, literally my PC crashed, and every time I went to switch it on and do it again, it crashed my PC. No idea why this happened, and I did manage to do the update, but I then very quickly deleted that tool. Thankfully though, I won't need to use it again. The lack of internet connection does mean that you can't get games of the month when they do them, but this isn't a big issue as the Game of the Month program that Blaze do on the Evercade does eventually see all of the games included release on the now annual Indie Heroes Collection cartridges. Some may question why to get an Evercade at all, when you can pretty much get all of the games available on Evercade and play them, say, on a Steam Deck or a Retroid Pocket or the Mii Mini Plus or one of these similar emulation-based devices. That's a fair question, but on the Evercade, all of the games are officially licensed, and that is important to the survival of these game developers and the franchises they make. I'll give you this example. If people hadn't bought the Monkey Island remasters because they could just download them for the Amiga and get the ROM files to play on their PC, it's less likely that we'd have ever got the new Monkey Island game that came out about a year ago. The games also come on cartridges, and they come with instruction booklets and come in boxes, which is an important part of the retro gaming experience. They are a curated selection of games and a great way to discover hidden gems and rediscover old classics. So coming back to the library of games, there are now games from consoles, games from handheld devices, and now games from home computers and arcade, all represented on the Evercade. Literally, we just need VR and maybe some board games and it would have everything on there. Now, due to licensing issues, some games we may like to see on the console may never happen. And perhaps there has been an issue where Blaze have been unable to get some of the heavy hitters on the systems as yet. Now, Capcom did dip their toes into the Evercade, but the games are only available as built-in games on the Evercade EXP and the Capcom Super Pocket. Likewise, the Taito Super Pocket means, or is it Taito, whatever, the Taito Super Pocket means you'll have to get that system to play those games. This does mean that the OG Evercade owners for the foreseeable future won't be able to play Bubble Bobble or Street Fighter 2, and games from those collections, other things like Final Fight or Puzzle Bobble, Buster Move, and that is a bummer, as those are some of the biggest franchises on the Evercade ecosystem. There may come a day when new carts released won't be compatible with the OG handheld, but this is perhaps where Evercade users should be grateful to the Super Pocket, as that console is a more modern release than even the EXP, but like the OG doesn't connect to the internet, and there is no reason I know of why there shouldn't continue to be parity between the compatibility of the OG Evercade and the Super Pockets. The OG Evercade is cheaper than the EXP, and maybe a shade more expensive than the Super Pockets. But if you can get one of the premium packs, you'll also get a Namco Cartridge Collection, which are now out of print. I really do enjoy having my OG Evercade, and I still actually play it relatively frequently. Yes, if you saw my recent video, I am the guy who decided not to update my limited edition EXP just because I'd got Donut Dodo downloaded onto it, and am stubbornly keeping that as the one-of-a-kind Evercade limited edition EXP Donut Dodo version. But hey, they just released more Evercade EXP limited editions that you could buy, and I picked one up. Now, that means I'll be able to use that going forward to be able to play all of the up-to-date games that won't work on my not up-to-date Donut Dodo EXP, but otherwise I can still use my OG one to play Duke Nukem or whatever games are going to come out in 2024 and beyond that won't work without that update. So we come to the ultimate question: is the OG Evercade still worth having in 2024 and hopefully beyond? And the answer is definitely yes. It is much cheaper to get than the EXP, so if you want to dip your toes into the Evercade ecosystem, then you can certainly pick up the original system. Some will prefer it. I think it has a slightly bigger screen than the Super Pockets, and whilst it may be a tiny bit more expensive than the Super Pockets, if you get the premium pack, then you'll get 3 cartridges with it, whereas if you get a Super Pocket, you'll just get the built-in games either from Taito or Capcom, so you can make the decision which you prefer. You may also prefer the vertical orientation of the Super Pockets, or you may prefer the horizontal orientation of the OG model. Should you get an OG one versus an EXP? That's tricky because, as things are, it should be that all games that are coming out for the foreseeable future, until we are told otherwise, will still work on the original Evercade. And if that's the case, then I'd say yeah, jump in. By the time they start saying that new games for the Evercade won't work on the OG system, I think you'll know by then if you like the Evercade, if you like its style and the type of games that are coming out on it, and then you could make the decision to make the upgrade then. If you want to be able to play it on your television, I forgot to mention this earlier, but both the EXP and the original Evercade can both be connected via HDMI. Now obviously you can't do 2-player games on the handhelds, which is a bit of a shame, and you'd have to use the Evercade VS for that purpose. But if you want to be able to record footage from your Evercade, the original one will allow you to do that, whereas the Super Pockets won't. So there's a few different options depending what you want, but I think the Evercade OG kind of didn't necessarily need replacing, and whilst I'm very happy with my EXP, the original Evercade is still super. More super than the Super Pockets in my opinion. But there you go, that's going to wrap things up for this deep dive return review of the OG original Evercade. Let me know what you think of it in the comments. Are you still holding on to your original? Have you upgraded to a EXP? Do you have the VS? Are these different things and you use them for different purposes at different times? Did you get a Super Pocket instead? Let me know. As always, make sure you smash the subscribe button here on the Geek Battle Gaming YouTube channel. Check out the written version of this discussion over on www.xstreamed.tv. And also just check out all of the Evercade and retro gaming and modern retro gaming stuff we've got on the channel. I just did a deep dive revisiting of the Atari VCS, and I'm going to have a bunch more console and hardware reviews coming up in the coming days and weeks, as well as revisiting some of the ones that I've already covered in the past. Now I'll also be covering titles like the Indie Heroes Collection 3, and the other upcoming and recently announced games for the Evercade. So there we have it. That was the OG original Evercade. I really enjoy playing this thing, and I hope you have a lot of fun exploring and playing the Evercade, whether you do it through the Evercade original, the Evercade versus home console, the Evercade EXP, the fancy new one. Look, I've got a limited edition black one. This is the one that only has Donut Dodo on it, and I don't think anyone else in the world still has a console just like that. Just saying. And of course there are the Super Pockets, so there's a load of way to play these very cool Evercade cartridges. Now, check out the rest of the stuff we've got on the channel. I've got a ton of Evercade reviews already on here, and basically I'm going to keep working through until I have reviewed everything the Evercade has ever put out, as well as stuff from the Atari VCS, new consoles. We don't have tons of PS5, Nintendo Switch or Xbox Series X games on here at the moment, but there are a lot coming. There are a lot of gaming documentaries coming up. And so with that, until next time, stay safe, always stay extremed, and ciao for now. Boom, we're off the air.